So in discussing classical macroeconomics, what we've done is we've set up the great debate that exists within macroeconomics. We talked about classical macro as emphasizing the idea that increased international trade and exchange within markets really creates more and more wealth. And as we create more and more wealth, well, the ebbs and flows of the business cycle, they don't matter quite as much. You can handle a little bit more when you're increasing in wealth. And as long as you're doing that, the short run problems, they're not as big as we might like to think. And in addition to that, we talked about how the macroeconomy really bounces back quite well in the short run. The idea that the macroeconomy has a self-corrective mechanism, and that even when we talk about money influencing the macroeconomy, we can say that money in the long run is somewhat neutral, as we discussed the quantity theory of money. And so here is the great debate. Are the classical economists, with their focus on the macroeconomy adjusting by itself quite quickly and good enough, is that a good enough solution to the macroeconomy's ebbs and flows of the business cycle? Or can we do better? Classical economists felt, let the economy do its thing. Prices adjust and the economy self-corrects. Most all economists agree with the quantity theory in the long run, but how long is the long run for monetary issues? How long is it for the self-corrective mechanism to adjust us back to our long-run aggregate supply curve and our aggregate supply aggregate demand model? This is the great debate. How rapidly does the economy adjust? Many economists believe that the long run in the quantity theory of money takes a long time to get to, which would mean that money is not neutral. So we'll eventually have to have some debate and see theories where people believe that we could manipulate the money supply to alter the economy, that it does have an impact in the short run, and perhaps that short run is long enough to the point where we should be manipulating the money supply or other factors of the macroeconomy. The classicals don't have much positive to say about manipulating the money supply or other elements of the economy. They hold that the quantity theory of money, within the long run, it's just not too far away. Prices adjust rather rapidly. They don't want you messing with the price mechanism. The price mechanism is what's coordinating the entire economy. Leave it alone and let it work. The self-corrective mechanism within the aggregate supply, aggregate demand model, the classicals say again, just leave the economy alone and we self-correct quick enough. Many economists believe that the self-corrective mechanism works, and it works in the long run, but it works slowly. If the self-corrective mechanism is slow, then market economies will experience prolonged periods of abnormally high unemployment and below capacity output. Hence we get Keynes's famous quip, in the long run, we're all dead. It takes us too long to get to the long run. We shouldn't wait, as the classical economists suggest, for the economy to adjust itself. The classicals believe that the self-corrective mechanism works fairly rapidly when it's not disrupted. This is the great debate of macroeconomics. This is really the important and continuing debate that we're going to return to over and over again as we look through different macroeconomic theories. We'll have many different theories, monetarists, new Keynesians, new classicals, Austrians. But at their core, they can all be placed into one of two camps. Those that think the economy adjusts best by itself, and those that think we need to adjust the economy, that we can solve some magneto problem within the economy better than if we let the economy adjust itself. We need, however, to remember that this is a tough question to answer. It is not just a matter of how long is the long run or how quickly does the self-corrective mechanism of an economy work. It is also a question of how quickly we can make it work if we try to manipulate the economy. This is an important comparative institutional approach question, so let me restate this in a slightly different way. The move from Y1 to YF, or full employment, is real individuals who are actually unemployed. It's real lives with people's livelihood at stake. It's a serious matter. Unemployment, as we said, is tied to many things like suicide rates, depression, mental health issues, all kinds of problems. Even domestic violence is linked to unemployment. We'd like to do better if we could. Can we get out of high levels of unemployment quicker than the self-corrective mechanism? If the self-corrective mechanism takes a long time to move from Y1 to YF, can we just sit back and trust that markets are going to self-correct? If the self-corrective mechanism takes 6 days, is that too long? What about 6 months? Or even 6 years? Thomas Sowell reminds us that it is wise in these situations to ask more than how long is the long run, or how long is too long. We must ask the question, compared to what? We live in an imperfectible world. Just because one solution is not perfect does not mean that it is not the best solution. It may be that the self-corrective mechanism takes 6 months to self-correct. And it might be that that seems too long or too important of an issue to just let it be. But if we're incapable of moving the economy back to full employment quicker than that, well, then we have to wait for the self-corrective mechanism. We can't just assume away reality. Thomas Sowell is reminding us to ask this question, compared to what? He's reminding us that good economics is a comparative economics, a comparative institutional approach. We have to compare the reality of one approach with the reality of another approach. We cannot just look at the self-corrective mechanism and say, it's not going fast enough, so therefore the other solution is better. We have to do comparative economics. As Thomas Sowell has said, implicit in the activist conception of government is the assumption that you can take the good things in a complex system for granted and just improve the things that are not so good. What is lacking in this conception is any sense that society, an institution, or even a single human being is an intricate system of fragile interrelationships whose complexities are little understood and easily destabilized. Thomas Sowell would come down on the side that the classical economists are usually right, that the self-corrective mechanism should just be left alone to do its thing. But even if you are on the other side, if you say we should do something about things, you still have to answer his question. Can we do better than the classical result? We can't just be upset that the self-corrective mechanism takes a long time. We must always remember to ask the question, compared to what? So that wraps up classical macro for us. To move on in this lecture series and hear the countering side, the Keynesian economic side, click on this video right over here and you'll keep going in this class.